Evening. Well, apologies that it's been so long since I've recorded another chapter of William Saroyan's The Human Comedy. I know that there's a few of you who are actually listening to this. So to you, I say I hope you enjoy this and sleep well afterwards. And we'll start with chapter 13, The Trap. My God, The Trap. It's like the best chapter title I've heard in a long time. It is one of my favorite chapter titles of all time. I'm going to show you the illustration that goes with this, just so you get a better idea of what's going on. Chapter 13, The Trap. My God, The Trap. When Homer McCauley swung onto his bicycle after the track meet to get to work as soon as possible, a man named Big Chris walked into Covington's sporting goods store on Tulare Street. He was a huge man, tall, lean, and hard, with a great blonde beard. He had just come down from the hills around Piedra to see about some new grub and shells and traps. Mr. Covington, the founder and proprietor of the store, began immediately to demonstrate to Big Chris the workings of a rather involved new trap that had been invented by a man out in Friant. The trap was enormous and complicated. It was made of steel, lemonwood, springs, and ropes. Its principles seemed to be to take the animal, swing it up and around, and hold it off its feet until the trapper arrived. "This is brand new," Mr. Covington said, "invented by a man named Safferty out in Friant. He's applied for a patent, and so far he's made only 2 of them, one on a model, which he sent to the patent office, and this one, which he sent to me to sell. The trap is for any kind of animal that walks. Mr. Safferty calls it the lift them off their feet, swing them around, and hold them, Safferty all-animal trap. He's asking $20 for it. Of course, the trap hasn't been tested, but as you can see for yourself, it is strong and could very likely lift, swing, and hold a full-grown bear with no difficulty at all." Big Chris listened to the proprietor of the sporting goods store as a child listens, and behind him, Ulysses McCauley listened with the same fascination, ducking in between the 2 men for a better view of the trap. Mr. Covington was under the impression that Ulysses belonged to Big Chris, and Big Chris was under the impression that Ulysses belonged to Mr. Covington, so that between the 2 of them, they had no reason to account for the small boy's presence. As for Ulysses himself, he was under the impression that he belonged wherever there was something interesting to see. "The remarkable thing about this trap," Mr. Covington said, "is that it will not hurt the animal, leaving the fur whole and undamaged. The trap is guaranteed by Mr. Safferty himself for a period of 11 years. This includes all parts: the pliancy of the wood, which is lemonwood, the endurance of the springs, the steel, the ropes, and all the other parts. Mr. Safferty, although not a trapper himself, believes this is the most effective and humane trap in the world. A man close to 70, he lives quietly in Friant, reading books and inventing things. He has invented, all told, 37 separate and distinct items of practical usefulness." Mr. Covington stopped his work with the trap. "Now," he said, "I believe the trap is set." Ulysses, crowding in to watch, moved too far. The trap closed on him gently but swiftly, lifted him off his feet, turned him around, and held him 3 feet off the floor, straight out, horizontally clamped in. No sound came from the boy, even though he was a little bewildered. Big Chris, however, did not take the event so lightly. "Careful there," he shouted to Covington. "I don't want your son to be hurt." "My son?" Covington said. "I thought he was your son. I never saw the boy before in my life. He came in with you." "He did?" Big Chris said. "I didn't notice." "Well, now hurry. Get him out of the trap. Get him out." "Yes, sir," Mr. Covington said. "Now, let me see." Big Chris was worried and confused. "What's your name, boy?" he said. "Ulysses," the boy in the trap said. "My name is Big Chris," the man from the hills said. "Now, you just hold tight there, Ulysses, and the man here will get you right out and set you down on your feet." Big Chris turned to Mr. Covington. "Well, "Come on now," he said. "Get the boy out. Get him out." Mr. Covington, however, was just as confused as Big Chris. "I'm not sure I remember how Mr. Safferty explained that part of the trap," he said. "Mr. Safferty didn't demonstrate the trap, you see, because, well, we didn't have anything to demonstrate it on. Mr. Safferty only explained it. I believe this is supposed to move out. No, it seems to be immovable." Now Big Chris and Mr. Covington went to work on the trap together. Big Chris holding Ulysses so that if the trap opened suddenly, Ulysses wouldn't fall on his face, and the other man fooling around with the various parts of the trap to see if anything would give way. "Well, hurry now," Big Chris said. "Let's not keep the boy in the air all day. You're not hurt, are you, Ulysses?" "No, sir," Ulysses said. "Well, you just hold tight," Big Chris said. "We'll get you out of this." He looked at the boy and then said, "What made you crowd in there?" "Watching," Ulysses said. "Yes, it is a fascinating sort of contraption, isn't it?" Big Chris said. "Now, the man here will get you right out, and I won't let you fall. How old are you?" "4," Ulysses said. "4," Big Chris said. "Well, I'm 50 years older than you. Now, the man here will get you right out, won't you?" And Big Chris turned to Mr. Covington. "What's your name?" he said. "Walter Covington," Mr. Covington said. "I own this store." "Well, that's fine," Big Chris said. "Now, Walter, get the boy out of the trap. Move that piece of wood there. I'm holding him. Don't you worry, Ulysses. What's your father's name?" "Matthew," Ulysses said. "Well, he's a lucky man to have a boy like you around," Big Chris said. "A fellow with his eyes open. I'd give the world to have a boy like you, Ulysses, but I never met the right woman. I met a girl in Oklahoma 30 years ago, but she went off with another fellow. Have you got it there, Walter?" "Not yet," Mr. Covington said, "but I'll get it. I believe this is supposed to... No. Mr. Safferty explained how to get the animal out of the trap, but it seems I just can't get the hang of it. Maybe the principle changes when it's a small boy instead of an animal." 2 men, a woman with a small girl, and 2 boys of 9 or 10 came into the store to watch. "What's the matter?" one of the boys said. "We got a boy caught in a trap here," Mr. Covington said. "A boy named Ulysses." "How did he get in?" one of the men said. "Shall I call a doctor?" "No, he isn't hurt," Big Chris said. "The boy's all right. He's just off his feet, that's all." "Maybe you ought to call the police," the woman said. "No, lady," Big Chris said. "He's just caught in the trap. The man here, Walter, he'll get the boy out." "Well," the lady said, "it's a shame the way little boys are made to suffer by all sorts of ridiculous mechanical devices." "The boy's all right, lady," Big Chris said. "He isn't suffering." "Well," the lady said, "if he were my boy, I'd have the police on you in 2 minutes." She turned away in a huff, dragging her little daughter along with her. I want to see," the little girl cried. "Everybody gets to see but me." The woman turned and shook the little girl and dragged her out of the store. "Now, don't you worry, Ulysses," Big Chris said. "We'll get you out of this in no time at all." Mr. Covington, however, gave up. "Maybe I'd better telephone Mr. Safferty," he said. "I can't get the boy out." "Got to stay here?" Ulysses said. "No, you don't, boy," Big Chris said. "No, you don't. We'll get you out." A boy with a dozen afternoon papers under his arm came into the store, crowded into the scene, looked at Ulysses, looked at the people, looked at Ulysses again, and then spoke. "Hello, Ulysses," he said. "What are you doing?" "Hello, Augie," Ulysses said. "Caught." "What for?" Augie said. "Got caught," Ulysses said. The newsboy tried to help Big Chris, but only got in the way. He looked around, panic-stricken and paralyzed, and after a moment of confusion bolted for the street. He ran straight into the telegraph office. Homer wasn't there, so he ran into the street again, running one way and then the other, bumping into people and shouting the day's headline all at the same time. A woman who had been bumped said to herself, "Crazy, crazy from trying to sell papers." Augie ran a full block, got out into the middle of the street to look around in 4 directions for Homer. It was a miracle that Homer appeared around a corner on his bicycle, but he did. Augie ran toward Homer, shouting at him with all his might. "Homer, you've got to come right away! Homer, you've got to—" Homer got off his bicycle. "What's the matter, Augie?" he said. "Homer, something's happened," Augie shouted, even though Homer was right beside him. "You've got to come with me, Homer!" He took Homer by the arm. "But what's the matter?" Homer said. "Over at Covington's," Augie said. "Hurry, you've got to come." "Ah," Homer said, "you want to show me some fishing tackle or a rifle or something in the window. I can't go around looking at things anymore, Augie. I'm working now. I've got to go to work." Homer got back on his wheel and began to ride away, but Augie took hold of the bike seat and trotted beside him, pushing the bike toward Covington's. "Homer," he shouted, "you've got to come with me. He's caught. He can't get out." "What are you talking about?" Homer said. Now they were across the street from Covington's. There was a small crowd in front of the store, and Homer began to be a little frightened. Augie pointed at the people. The two boys pushed through the crowd into the store to the trap. There in the trap was Homer's brother Ulysses, and around the trap were Big Chris, Mr. Covington, and a number of strange men and women and boys. "Ulysses!" Homer shouted. "Hello, Homer," Ulysses said. Homer turned to the people. "What's my brother doing in that thing?" he said. "He got caught," Mr. Covington said. "What are all these people doing around here?" Homer said. Go on home," he said to the people. "Can't a small boy get caught in a trap without the whole world hanging around?" "Yes," Mr. Covington said. "I'll have to ask you people to go who are not customers." Mr. Covington studied the people. "Mr. Wallace," he said, "you can stay. You trade here, and you, Mr. Sickert, George, Mr. Spindle, Shorty." "I trade here," a man said. "I bought fish hooks here not more than a week ago." "Yes," Mr. Covington said, "fish hooks. The rest of you will have to go." Only two people moved away a little bit. "Don't worry, Ulysses," Homer said. "Everything's going to be all right now. It's a good thing Augie found me. Augie, run over to the telegraph office and tell Mr. Spangler my brother Ulysses is caught in a trap at Covington's and I'm trying to get him out. I'm late already, but I'll tell him I'll be over as soon as I can get Ulysses out of the trap. Hurry now." Augie turned and ran. He bumped into a policeman who was coming into the store and almost knocked the man down. "What's all the commotion about?" the policeman said. "We've got a small boy caught in a trap here," Mr. Covington said. "Can't get him out." "Let me look into this," the policeman said. He looked at Ulysses, then turned to the people. "All right now," he said, "get along with you, all of you. These things happen every day. You've got better things to do than stand around and watch a small boy in a trap." The policeman moved the people out of the store and locked the front door. He turned to Mr. Covington and Big Chris. "Now let's get this boy out of this thing and send him home," he said. "Yes," Mr. Covington said, "and the sooner the better. You've got my shop closed at 4:30 in the afternoon." "Well, how does this thing work?" Homer said. "It's a new trap," Mr. Covington said, "just invented by Mr. Wilfred Safferty of Friant. He's asking $20 for it, and a patent's been applied for." "Well, get my brother out of it," Homer said, "or get somebody who can. Get Mr. Safferty." "I've already tried to telephone Mr. Safferty, but the telephone is out of order," Mr. Covington said. "Out of order?" Homer shouted. He was very angry about the whole thing. "What do I care if the phone's out of order?" he said. "Get the man down here and get my brother out of the trap." "Yes, I think you'd better do that," the policeman said to Mr. Covington. "Officer," Mr. Covington said, "I'm trying to run a legitimate business. I'm a law-abiding citizen, and I pay my taxes, out of which I might say you obtain your salary. I have already tried to reach Mr. Safferty by telephone. The telephone appears to be out of order. I cannot leave my shop in the middle of the day to go looking for him." Homer looked at Mr. Covington straight in the eye and placed a wagging finger under his nose. "You go get the inventor of this torture machine," he said, "and get my brother out of it. That's all." "It's not a torture machine," Mr. Covington said. "It's the most improved animal trap on the market. It holds the animal aloft without damage to fur or body. No squeezing, cutting, or crushing. It operates on the principle of dislocating the animal from its base and thereby rendering it powerless. Besides, Mr. Safferty may not be home." "Ah," Homer said, "what are you talking about?" Now the policeman decided to study the trap. Maybe, he suggested, we'd better saw the boy out. Saw steel? Mr. Covington said. How? Ulysses, Homer said, do you want anything? Are you all right? Can I get you anything? Big Chris, sweating, worked hard over the trap, looking from one brother to the other, deeply moved by the calm of the little boy in the trap and the furious devotion of his brother. Ulysses, Homer said, can I get you anything? Papa, Ulysses said. Ah, Homer said, can I get you anything besides Papa? Marcus, the boy in the trap said. Marcus is in the army, Homer said. Do you want an ice cream or anything like that? No, Ulysses said, just Marcus. Well, Marcus is in the army, Homer said. He turned to Covington. Get my brother out of this thing and hurry up about it too, he said. Wait a minute, Big Chris said. Hold your brother there, boy. Don't let him fall. Big Chris was very busy with the trap now. You're breaking the trap, Mr. Covington said. It's the only one of its kind in the world. You mustn't break it. I'll go get Mr. Safferty. You're wrecking a great invention. Mr. Safferty's an old man. He may never be able to make another trap like this. The boy's all right. He's unhurt. I'll go get Mr. Safferty. I'll only be another hour or two. Another hour or two, Homer shouted. He looked at Mr. Covington with the most terrible contempt in the world, and then all around the store. I'll break this whole store, he said. He turned to Big Chris. Go ahead, mister, he said. Break the trap. Break it. Big Chris tugged at the trap with every muscle in his fingers, arms, shoulders, and back, and little by little the trap began to give way to the force of his strength. Ulysses twisted around to watch the man. At last, Big Chris destroyed the trap. Ulysses was free. Holding him so that he would not fall on his face, Homer set his little brother on his feet. The crowd in front of the store cheered, but not effectively, as they were unorganized and had no leader. Ulysses tried out his legs. As everything seemed to be all right now, Homer put his arms around his brother. Ulysses looked at Big Chris. The big man was almost exhausted. Somebody's got to pay for that trap, Mr. Covington said. It's ruined. Somebody's got to pay for it. Without a word, Big Chris brought some currency out of his pocket, counted out $20 of it, and tossed it on the counter. He took Ulysses by the head and rubbed the boy's hair, as a father sometimes does. Then he turned and walked out of the store. Homer talked to his brother. Are you all right? He said. How do you get into these terrible things? Homer looked at the ruined trap and then kicked it. Careful there, boy, the policeman said. That's some kind of new invention. There's no telling what it's liable to do. Mr. Covington went out into the street to speak to the people there. The store is open for business again, he said. Covington's opens at 8 every morning, closes at 7 every night, except Saturdays when we are open till 10. Closed all day Sunday. Everything in the sporting line, fishing tackle, guns, ammunition, and athletic goods. We're open for business, ladies and gentlemen. Come right in. The people slowly walked away. Homer turned to the policeman before leaving the store. Who was that man that got my brother out of the trap? He said. Never saw the man before in my life, the policeman said. Big Chris, Ulysses said to Homer. Is that his name? Big Chris? Homer said. Yes, Ulysses said. Big Chris. Now Augie ran into the store. He looked at Ulysses. Did you get out, Ulysses? He said. How did you get out, Ulysses? Big Chris, Ulysses said. How did he get out, Homer? Augie said. What happened? What happened to the trap? Where's the big man with the beard? What happened while I was gone? Everything's all right, Augie, Homer said. Did you tell Mr. Spangler what I told you? Yeah, I told him, Augie said. What happened, Homer? Does the trap work? Will it catch animals? Ah, Homer said, that trap's a lot of hooey. What good would it do you to catch an animal if you couldn't get it out? Mr. Covington, he said to the owner of the store, you got a lot of nerve charging Big Chris $20 for a piece of junk like that. $20 is the standard price, Mr. Covington said. Standard price? Homer said. What are you talking about? Come on, Augie, let's get out of here. The three boys left the store and walked to the telegraph office. Mr. Spangler was leaning on the counter looking out at the street. Mr. Grogan was sending a telegram. Homer was limping worse than ever now from his collision with Mr. Byfield in the 2:20 low hurdle race. He stopped to speak to the manager of the telegraph office. "Mr. Spangler," he said, "this is my brother Ulysses. We just got him out of some kind of trap over at Covington's. Big Chris got him out. He had to break the trap, and then he had to pay for it. $20. This is Augie. Did he tell you why I'm late?" "Everything's all right," Spangler said. "A few telegrams have piled up that you've got to deliver, but that's all. So that's your brother, Ulysses?" Ulysses was standing behind the telegraph operator, watching him work. In front of the telegraph operator, across the table, Augie stood, listening to the telegraph box. "A few calls have come in, too," Spangler said. "I took a couple of the near ones myself. The other two are on the call sheet. Take the calls first, then deliver the telegrams." "Yes, sir," Homer said. "Right away. I'm awfully sorry about this, Mr. Spangler. Will you mind Ulysses until I get back? Maybe a little later, when things are quiet, I can take him home on my wheel." "I'll mind your brother," Spangler said. "You go ahead." "Yes, sir," Homer said. "Thank you. Ulysses won't be any trouble. He'll just watch. He won't do anything." Homer left the telegraph office, limping in a hurry. Thank you.